Visit that.
Well, today it's Drink It, Virginia, right?
It's my favorite iteration of our podcast.
I know it is. So hi, I'm Robey. I am one half of Eat It, Virginia, and then this is Scott.
My first time out since March, I think, as the hair indicates.
I like it. It's very floppy.
Yes, it's very floppy and very, quarantine-y. It's my quarantine haircut.
It's good.
Yeah, thank you.
It's good. You're looking young. Anyway, we have two great guests with us today. They are, the backbone of Hardywood. I'm looking at Kate Lee, who is the Vice President of Operations. So pretty much you run
One
everything.
heartbeat away from the President of Operations.
Who is the President of Operations? You actually as well. So it's cool. And then we have Patrick Murtaugh, who is the brewer, owner, and co-founder of Hardywood. Hi, guys.
Hello.
Hey, Robey. I'm Scott.
Hi. This is very weird. Usually we do these podcasts very close to our guests. We have to get either into their restaurants or right across the table from them. Since March, we've been doing the podcast over Zoom, calling across the state, talking to people. So this is our first kind of distanced podcast with guests.
I know, it's very weird, like this.
I don't know if I should look over there or if I should...
Well, we have such great guests. I feel like we should stare at them.
It's an audio podcast, so you can look wherever you want. It doesn't really matter.
Oh, yeah, nobody's going to see us, so that's... Unless this lovely gentleman right here, so it's nice to have him videoing, so thank you so much. So let's just get right into it. We'll start with you, Patrick. How did you get here? Not by 64 West. I told you you couldn't say that.
Oh, well, then I don't have an answer.
Dad jokes.
How did I get here? How did Hardywood start, I assume? What was the impetus of
There was
where
a
we are
sheep
now?
farm.
There was a sheep farm in Australia, once upon a time. I guess it kind of goes back to right after I graduated college in 2001. So the sheep farm reference Robey's referring to was back, my business partner Eric McKay was studying abroad in Australia, and part of his orientation program was spending time in the sheep farm. They kind of put him to work doing horrible things to sheep. No, birthing sheep was one of the things. Just sounds horrible to me, but
You say burning?
no,
Birthing.
Birthing.
Gotcha, sorry.
I was like, that was
Totally
horrible
different.
things.
So I had just graduated school and was backpacking around with a friend of mine, and he was back out visiting this family at the sheep farm, and the sheep farm happened to be called Hardywood Park. And so he invited a friend of mine and I, who I was traveling with, out to spend some time at the farm, and they put us to work also on the farm. I remember the day I was out there, we were delousing sheep, which involved throwing these sheep onto a conveyor belt where they went up about 5 feet and then were dumped into a pool of delousing solution. I remember having the worst allergies of my life, and being a native New Yorker, this was extremely foreign to me. But at the end of the day, we'd finished with a glass of the farmer's homebrewed beer, and that was kind of that epiphany moment for us that, wow, beer can be so much more than just a cheap light lager. And I don't know if it was the setting or what, but it kind of inspired us to want to start brewing ourselves. And so we got back to the States. Eventually we got a home brewing kit and started brewing, and Eric and I had grown up together, and we had talked about starting a business probably since we were 16. Didn't really know what that would be until we started home brewing, and then said, well, maybe we should start a brewery. And that was probably 2002. And neither of us had really much experience in the brewing industry. Eric, I think he interned at a brewery in college. But so we both got jobs working for a beer wholesaler in New York City and kept home brewing and started writing a business plan. We must have wrote 1,000 times, and eventually Eric went back to business school. I went to brewing school, which happened to be the same brewing school my great-grandfather went to and my great-uncle went to. My great-grandfather went there in 1908. And then finished my brewing studies in Germany, and around the time I got back, I had a few apprentices in between, but we got the funding together finally to start a brewery. This is at a time when banks weren't really talking to two guys that wanted to start a brewery. So it all came, all our fundraising came through private equity. And so we had looked at a lot of different places, looked in North Carolina quite a bit. The laws were starting to change and become more favorable for craft breweries. And so there weren't very many, yet they were growing. And Eric had moved to Richmond a couple years before and kept telling me what a great town Richmond was, and that there was a lot of enthusiasm for craft beer. A lot of people went to go hang out at Mekong and talk about beer and drink beer, and yet there was only one distributing craft brewery in Richmond. And so I finally said, yeah, this definitely seems like the place. And so we leased a building right near the Diamond in Richmond. And we looked at a lot of spaces. We looked at quite a few spaces in Scott's Addition, actually, which was just an empty warehouse district. I don't know whatever happened to that place, but
it's a fad.
Probably nothing.
Yeah.
So
it's still an empty warehouse district.
But there was nothing with the ceiling height we needed. I think we knew we wanted to be we definitely knew we wanted to be a distributing brewery as opposed to more focused on our tap room, because we weren't allowed to be a tap room brewery at the time. You could only give away free samples in your tap room. Other than that, you had to distribute your beer, unless you had a restaurant like Legend did. But that was never our plan. We didn't really have any experience in the restaurant industry. We wanted to be a distributing brewery. So this was always, I think the building we got was always sort of a means to an end. It was something to start in and get the wheels going. And eventually we bought the building next door and expanded into that building. And I guess we got to a point where we were kind of outgrowing our facility. The law had changed in the meantime, allowing us to be able to sell glasses of beer in our tap room. So that really helped pick up the steam a little bit. It gave us the funding to expand faster than just the very slim margins we made from wholesale. And we got to a point where we were at capacity, and we either had to decide to sort of stay where we were and be a tap room focused brewery, or continue on our plan to be a distributing brewery. And so we started looking around at other buildings to see if there was anything that suited our needs to grow into. We didn't really find what we needed, and then we found West Creek, this business park, and it was very underdeveloped. Capital One was there, CarMax was there, and all that, PFG, and Federal Reserve, but there was a lot of empty space. We found this property and loved it. Overlooked this creek, and it just seemed to be on this beautiful setting. And then it had this natural sort of dip in the earth that we thought could create a great little amphitheater. We'd started doing a lot of live music at our brewery in Richmond, and so that was very attractive to us. And eventually we convinced the bank that we'd be a good investment, and we bought this property and built what we see behind us here.
I think we're done, Robey. That was a
That's
long
it.
answer to a
And
very
that's a
short
wrap.
question.
Man,
All right.
everybody,
It's the easiest paycheck we've ever made.
man.
Sorry, that was really long.
No, that was great, but that was okay. So all started in 2011 when you guys broke ground.
Yeah, we started in October 2011.
So 9 years of almost exactly, right?
The first building, not this
Right,
one.
not this one, sure, no. But that's all. So that was 9 years plus
Yeah,
some
yes,
graduation
we're
and
coming up
sheep.
on our 9-year anniversary in October, and no sheep were harmed in the building.
Only deloused.
Just deloused.
So a part of that backstory, you mentioned that your great-grandfather was a brewer?
Yeah, my great-great-grandfather was a brewer. Came here from
Great-great-grandfather.
1890 from Germany, and was the brewmaster of a pretty big brewery in Springfield, Massachusetts. Then his son, my great-grandfather, was also a brewer. He's the one who studied at the brewing school I went to.
So
And
it's
then
not
his
totally
son-
random that you now own a brewery. There's a
honestly,
bloodline there.
it's more coincidental, actually. After I started homebrewing, I found this obituary in my parents' attic, and it was my great-great-grandfather, my mother's great-grandfather, and it had his whole, biography in there, in that obituary, and that definitely kind of spurred my interest a little bit, but I had already just gotten into homebrewing, but before that, I really had my mother might have mentioned at some point, we had some brewing relatives in the family, but that's about all I knew. And I didn't really have a whole lot of interest until I started homebrewing, so it was never really something I inquired a whole lot about. And then, so that was really interesting to me. And then it was probably, 7 or 8 years later that I enrolled in this brewing program at the Singel Institute, which is, I think, the oldest brewing school in the country, that I was there for about 2 weeks, and I went out to dinner with my aunt one night, and she was like, asked me how brewing school was going, and said, my grandfather went there, your great-grandfather. I'm like, no, I had no idea. And she's like, yeah, my uncle went there too, your great-uncle. And I'm like, I didn't know that. And then I went into class the next day, and sure enough, about 2 feet from where I'd been sitting the first 2 weeks was this composite picture of the class from 1908 with all the students complete with their ascots and big beards, and Mr. Siebel in the middle, and there was my great-grandfather, what was his name, Henry Kuhn, and then his son was a little further down the wall, Albert Kuhn.
I mean, this is meant to be. I mean, obviously, you've already thought about this, and you've already talked about it, I'm sure. But I mean, it's incredible and amazing.
I've mentioned it a few times, but it's it's an interesting story, and it's unbelievable. I mean, I wouldn't believe it if I heard it, but I literally had no idea. One, that I had brewers further than my great-great-grandfather in the family, and two, that they went to the brewing school I just enrolled in.
So that's how you got into this too, Kate? Like, right? You have an ancestor?
I was not on a sheep farm, and I do not have any ancestors in this business at all. Is this my go?
It's now your turn.
All right, so my story is very different than Patrick's. There is no sheep farm in my story. But I went to North Carolina State University and received my degree in food science. And, do I have it? Wolfpack? Okay, all right.
Dad went there.
Okay, there you go, there you go. So I had initially looked to get my food science degree as I was interested in nutrition and really kind of trying to focus on health, exercise, and that type of thing. And I took my very first food chemistry class, and we learned all about making wine and making beer, and that's when everything just kind of clicked for me that this is exactly what I wanted to do. So I interestingly started my food science major without knowing what I wanted to do completely, but I found it while I was there. So graduated knowing that I wanted actually to get into beer making, and ended up taking the very first job that I was offered, which was not in the beer business. It was down in Atlanta, Georgia for a company called Eastern Foods, and I did research and development for a salad dressing company. We did naturally fresh salad dressings. So you guys may have seen them in like the refrigerated section, very similar to like Marzetti's. So I did recipe development for them. Same company that owned Eastern Foods also owned Hooters. So I did menu development for Hooters as well. And
there's food at Hooters?
There is food at Hooters. And there's amazing wing sauce at Hooters, and if you've had their 911 wing sauce, I am actually responsible for helping in that recipe development. So anyway, long time ago, but
beer's coming.
The beer is coming. So that was
the wing sauce is great.
Yeah. There was actually, so we would have what I'd call wing emergencies when they would call the local like Hooters chains in Atlanta would call, and I would have to go in the company car with my lab coat on to the Hooters, go into the kitchen, and the emergency was that the wing sauces were separating, like the butter from the hot sauce.
Can I just interrupt for a second? What did the company car look like?
It was a Cadillac. Was it
Was it orange?
What'd you say?
With an owl on it?
No owl, just...
Was it orange and white?
No, just a white Cadillac. But I always had to drive the Cadillac, and I always had to keep my lab coat on.
Seriously?
In a Hooters.
For a wing emergency. That's why it's called 911 sauce.
So after that, I actually got an opportunity to work at Anheuser-Busch, and I joined them about 2.5 years after I graduated from college. I'm going to go ahead and age myself. I think it was about 2002 that I joined Anheuser-Busch, and I started with them in their quality assurance department as a quality group manager, just a supervisor over both the brewing and packaging areas, and worked my way up with them. I worked at 4 of their domestic locations. I started in Fort Collins, Colorado, moved out to Columbus, Ohio, Merrimack, New Hampshire, and then down to Williamsburg, Virginia, where I was their assistant brewmaster at the brewery there. In 2013, I think it was, I was at an event with my father at, it was a startup, I can't even remember what the group was. It was like a small business startup group.
Oh, God.
I can't remember
Don't
what it was,
remember.
but it was being hosted by Hardywood, and that's where I met Eric and Patrick, and we kind of joked about, I introduced myself, and we joked about me working for them, and we both kind of laughed and parted our separate ways. And they got back in touch with me, and it took probably a year for both of us to be able to commit, but I joined the team in 2014 in January, and coming up soon on 7 years with these guys. And right now I started as the director of quality assurance, started the quality assurance program here, and now I am vice president vice president of operations and quality. So that's my story. No sheep, no ancestors.
Just a vice president.
Patrick, you mentioned that when you guys started, there was only one other craft brewery in town. Now there's quite a few more.
There are. Yes.
There are. What sets Hardywood apart from the pack? What do you guys think makes you guys unique and special?
God, I think one of the great things about the brewing scene in Richmond is that every brewery is a little bit different. There's some that are more similar to others, but they all have their own personality, and they all have their own kind of specialties, things they do best.
So what is the Hardywood personality then?
I can't speak for what other breweries do. I'm not extremely up on exactly what every other brewery is doing, so I can't tell you everything we do is unique only to us. But I know, and this isn't just because we're kind of here focused on local ingredients, but that really was a big part of our I'd be lying to say if that was in our business plan, but once we started, we quickly really committed ourselves to putting a big focus on sourcing local. We created a whole series of beers around using at least one locally sourced ingredient, locally grown, or we've used locally roasted coffee, but everything from raspberries and blackberries to pumpkins and ginger and honey and malt and hops, all grown in Virginia by small family farms. And the reason we do that is, I think there are a ton of reasons. I guess to name a few, one is that it really, being able to talk to the people that are actually growing your ingredients just inspires creativeness and inventiveness and fun. But it also allows us to get to know where our ingredients are coming from. Local doesn't mean better, but it allows us to know that we're using the best possible ingredients. When you're ordering them from a big distributor far away, from a faraway mega conglomerate farm, you don't know what kind of practices they use to grow your ingredients. And also just we're putting money back in the local economy. So I think those are the three best reasons I can give for sourcing local.
Sure. You guys visit the farms that you use the ingredients.
Yeah.
Like
We've
go out and say hi?
done trips where we brought the whole team out to pick blackberries at Agriberry and Castlemont Farms where they grow our ginger. So yeah, that's the fun of it, going out there and actually, and for a lot of the brewers, they kind of, a lot of times just have their head down making the best beer they possibly can. To go and actually see these ingredients being grown is, I think, really impactful and, again, inspires creativity.
So there's like an urban legend that you guys use like almost all of the ginger that Castlemont produces.
And then some.
Is that the case?
I think they probably save a little bit for the farmers markets, but we use probably the good majority of it.
And where does that ginger go?
Goes into this little beer called Gingerbread Stout. I'm not sure if you've heard of it, but we are actually packaging it right now.
So let's talk about that.
On the premises?
Like that beer is like a big beer for you guys because it essentially, when it came out as the 100 point or the top rated, how did that change your trajectory as Hardywood when Gingerbread Stout goes boom, essentially?
It definitely helps. It's hard to say exactly how that changed our trajectory, but it definitely helps kind of get our name out there a little bit. It was the first year we were in business. I think it was that November that we brewed it, and brewed a really small batch of it that first year, and sent some off to be reviewed by Beer Advocate magazine, and yeah, we got a perfect 100 score. It had only been given out a few times before, which was huge for us, especially just starting out. and then we went to San Diego to the Great American Beer Festival, and ended up winning a bronze award for that. And when you're sitting there in this hall of all your, hero brewers that, you kind of got to know as these, as icons, in the industry. And then having our new company name being called out as a winner of an award was really awesome. So, we've won a few awards since then, but that first one was by far the coolest. So it's hard to say, but it's definitely gotten us some. It's probably been the one to get us the most recognition beyond Virginia, beyond our
Kind of back to your original question, what are we known for, or what sets us apart? Obviously, gingerbread stout is something that we're known for, but it has also created kind of this idea that we're really great at brewing stouts. And quite honestly, as much as we've tried to at one point get away from being a stout brewery, we're good at it, And so I think that we've embraced that recently, but that's something that, we have a few little niches. One of them is definitely local ingredients, but I also think our brewers and Brian Nelson, our head brewer, is incredible at putting together stouts, and they're pretty much impeccable every time. So that's one thing that gingerbread stout did for us.
You mentioned that visiting the local farms sparked the creativity. Do you have a specific example of a trip you guys might have gone on, or a beer that was born out of a session like that?
Yeah, I mean, Agriberry is one of the farms we were, well, I don't know, I wouldn't even say that. I mean, Castlemont we've become really close with too. I mean, all of them I remember sitting down doing a coffee pour over with Lamplighter coffee, and that was a lot of fun. We just got to riffing on what, and I liked coffee, but never really knew that much about the intricacies of coffee, and that was definitely got the creative juices flowing. But I would say the first and biggest one was probably Bill Cox knocking on our door with like 3 big stalks of ginger, our second or first month in business, and not knowing what this guy knocking on our door was carrying in his hand. But we brought him in, and he had said he had heard we used some local ginger, which we actually got a bunch of it from Elwood's, and it was grown locally, and he was like, I grow ginger. It's this baby Hawaiian ginger that I think you would love. And so we said, all right, we'll give it a try. And I like ginger, but I wouldn't call myself a ginger fan. But so I knew nothing about ginger. But we said we'd love to try it, and so we sliced some up, and we tried this ginger, and sure enough, it was still the best ginger I'd ever had. And it was just this really subtle, interesting kind of flavor. And so we didn't really know what we would do with it, but we said, we'll definitely use it at some point. I mean, it's really good. And then Eric met Cy Bearer from Bearer Farms. He's a beekeeper that sold honey. And it was Eric who said, what if we put those two together and made a gingerbread stout? And that's kind of what inspired gingerbread stout.
So for people that aren't super intimately familiar with the brewing process, when do these ingredients go into making the beer?
Sure. So we've actually experimented adding them during different times. There's kind of what we call a hot side and the cold side in the brewing process. So the hot side is going to be our brew house. That's where we're actually mixing together the milled grain, the malted barley, and the water together, basically to make something that looks like an oatmeal consistency, or what we call the mash. You can add some ingredients at this time, but for gingerbread stout particularly, we actually add everything into the secondary fermentation process. So we allow that sweet water that we make, which is called wort, in the brew house. We push it forward into the fermenting cellars. We pitch some yeast into it so those yeast can eat those sugars. After the yeast is all done eating the sugars, that is when we introduce a lot of what we call adjuncts, these secondary ingredients into the process. So the honey, the spices, the ginger, real whole vanilla beans. We may have a number for the amount of vanilla beans that our brewers have to process. It's insane. But we
What
have
is the number?
What is the number, Patrick?
Well, I actually just looked it up because I thought that question would come up. Thanks for asking, Kate.
I feel like
You're welcome.
she just lobbed it up there, so I now need to ask.
It's 4,400 individual vanilla beans on average.
4,400 individual?
Per 360 barrel batch.
Wow.
360 barrels is our biggest fermenter.
And one would say, why don't you use, ground vanilla beans, or, why don't you use vanilla flavor or extract or anything? Obviously, we're very, very committed to using real ingredients in our Virginia Root series, which is the series that Patrick was talking about before, the one that we use local ingredients. And we have honestly tested ground vanilla beans and whole vanilla beans and vanilla extract, and we've tested the difference, and that nothing compares to the flavor that the actual whole, freshly processed vanilla bean will give you. So we take the hard way on that one.
So speaking of taking the hard way, because it's getting ready to be October, and there's obviously going to be like gobs of pumpkin beer, you guys use roasted whole pumpkins, right?
Yeah, we're not roasting them anymore, but yeah, we're using whole pumpkins. Yeah,
those actually, so the pumpkins are actually introduced into the hot side. So that's a bit different of a process. We don't put those on the cold side. In fermenting, we actually use the pumpkin, they're pureed pumpkins in the hot side. So it's introduced at a different time during gingerbread. Take Raspberry Scout, for example, which is another beer in that series, and those raspberries are added in the cold side into secondary fermentation. What that does is the raspberries will carry some sugars, so it actually sets the beer back into a secondary fermentation. So those yeasts have kind of finished eating all the sugars that are available in the wort, in the grain, and once they're done, we put in the raspberries, a whole bunch more food comes available, the yeast starts to act back up, they start to eat again. Adding them into secondary really creates a very intense flavor, as opposed to if we were going to add it into the hot side. It's kind of, think about a fresh raspberry versus a cooked raspberry. It's a very different flavor profile.
She should have worn that lab coat to this podcast.
No kidding. I don't have one for Hardywood, but I should, right? Maybe.
Why don't
Patrick,
you
get on it, man. Come on.
White lab coat, big raspberry.
So we've been talking obviously a lot about your successes over the last decade plus, or 9 years we said, right?
favorite thing to talk about.
9 years. Well, we're going to pivot.
Talk about our failures.
The COVID pivot. Obviously, earlier this year, the world changed, and curious how it's changed for Hardywood, both on the processing side and on the consumer side.
Well, I'll talk about the consumer side, talk about the production side, but it's been tough. Restaurants all of a sudden were shutting down overnight, and all our draft business sort of stopped. We shut our tap room down for a couple days while we figured out what we were going to do. Once it became clear that it just wasn't safe to operate as normal, and so I guess the changes we made, we closed our indoor tap room. We eventually opened our patio. Our tap room has become a pretty big part of our business, at least for now, while we grow our wholesale business. Wholesale is all based on volume, and you can become a sustainable wholesale business, standalone business, but it takes quite a bit of volume to do that. So our tap room is very important to us, and then we had Capital One, which had 9,000 or so employees, half mile down the road, that a bunch of them would come here after work and have a beer, and they would rent our private event space, and they're all working from home now. So that business went away. So our tap room business, not to tell a sob story, but our tap room business has definitely suffered a little bit, and restaurant business, while it's it picked up a little bit, isn't nearly what it was last year. Grocery business is good. That was better than it was last year, so we're growing there, which is good. not enough to make up, unfortunately, for the lost restaurant business. But yeah, so you know, we've been able to find some new avenues of income. One, we started delivering beer, we started shipping beer, and we started doing curbside pickup, so people can reserve, say, a case of Richmond Lager and come and you know, basically have it dropped in their trunk and drive away. So trying to do things as safe as we can. We've drew spray painted circles in our lawn. Social separation circles.
So we're out here now, obviously at your West Creek location, and I mean the crowd is decent, right? I mean it's a decent crowd. I mean,
yeah.
The patio seems to
it's
have walked
great.
through there earlier tonight.
It's great, and honestly, some Saturdays have been as good as they were last year. Unfortunately, it's like the Tuesday through Friday groups that aren't what they were last year. It's the events that have stopped that you know, hurt us a little bit. We don't do any bigger events. Last Saturday would have been our Bluegrass Festival, which was, you know, a big event for us, and that we didn't do that. So yeah, there are definitely on nice weather days we've been able to bring some people in. We've limited our occupancy even on the patio by shutting down our overflow parking and just kind of limiting to the parking we have on site. We've been using the Markel-owned property across the street for overflow parking last year. So, you know, managing that isn't always easy. Managing, you know, trying to get people to wear masks that don't want to wear masks, and when they go inside, can be a challenge. So there are definitely some challenges, and our front of house staff, you know, hats off to them. They've done a really great job at managing that, and it's all new to them. There are a lot of new rules that people aren't used to following, and our team isn't used to enforcing. So so we've been managing the best we can. We were able to get the PPP loan in the IDL, which will hopefully get us through until, you know, we can find some sort of treatment or vaccine, and yeah, as best we can hope for.
Do you want me to go into production?
Please do.
Okay, yeah. So from a production standpoint, things certainly went topsy-turvy there for quite a while. You know, a lot of people have asked me why we didn't always ship beer and why we didn't always do curbside pickup. And a lot of the state laws didn't allow us to be able to do those types of things. So that was something that was changed as a result from COVID. And that is why you have seen so many breweries now able to do these things. Something that it has taught us is innovation. We had to get real creative with ways to bring in revenue. Like Patrick said, our draft sales completely stopped. So we were no longer filling kegs. People weren't drinking beer on premise anymore, so there really wasn't any kind of demand for it. The other thing is we had to become way more creative on the type of beers we were brewing, simply because we had to keep people interested from week to week and coming. Of course, people love Richmond Lager over and over again, and Singel and Pils, but we were finding that people were really seeking innovation and creativity during quarantine. And so we responded to that, and we really started brewing a lot of what we call one-off beers. Really just trying to keep people interested and coming back week to week, give them something new to look forward to. From that, we spawned virtual tastings, where we actually every week, Friday and Saturday, we offer tickets to a virtual tasting. And so for that virtual tasting, we would offer 3 beers and some sort of local food pairing with a company like your guys. And we'd offer that for delivery or pickup. And we send them a Zoom link, and Patrick, Eric, Brian, myself, sometimes our brewers are involved. We go through like an hour and a half session. We taste beers together, we eat food together, we make terrible jokes together, and we've since kind of gained a following from that, which has been really awesome. We've made a lot of new friends from it.
I
You
loved
did.
it.
You
It
did.
was so fun. You guys were all there, and then some wild guy in the background.
They get a little wild,
Ryan?
especially after
It
the
was
third beer.
100% Ryan.
So, you know,
He's still a wild guy in the background.
He's right there.
it's really just spawned a lot of innovation and creativity in the back, which of course is creating a lot of logistical challenges for us. Now that business is picking up, especially at grocery and off-premise, we're having to keep up with all the regular year-round beers that we do, but we're still, 100% committed to this creativity, innovation, and these fun one-off brands. So it's been a challenge, for sure.
You guys have some cool new releases. You had one at Sheets, which is a watermelon wheat beer that you guys can now get at Sheets, which is very cool. And then you had one at Trader Joe's, which it's a speculous. Is that how you say it?
Cookie butter.
Speculous.
Speculous.
It's a cookie butter.
Their famous cookie butter. They asked us to. It's one of their most popular products that they sell, and they asked us to brew a beer that would either taste like it or pay homage to it.
Does it taste like it?
I think it does.
Really?
Oh, well, we'll be getting some of that, Scott.
Have you tasted the cookie butter before?
I think that we have some. I think we have biscotti butter or something that have a. Anyway, not the point. The point is not that one, and I absolutely will because that sounds really
In a
fun.
knockoff brand.
It does taste like it.
So we put some questions out. Well, we actually were like, "What would you like to know about Hardywood?" on our social media, and we got some
A handful.
questions.
And I think we can open up the floor for questions later.
We're definitely going to
So think about questions you guys might want to ask while we go through these, and then we'll knock that out. All right, these are two, no one in particular. Well, you two in particular, but between the two of you, no one in particular. Question number 1. What style of beer do you always order when trying a new brewery's product?
Mine's easy. IPA.
And why is that?
Because I like IPAs.
So it's all about you. Okay, got it.
Super
No,
confident.
IPAs is my favorite style of beer. I love IPAs because there's such a wide range of what falls under an IPA. You can have a highly bittered IPA. You can have a really fruity IPA without even adding fruits into it. There's so many options for hops, and they all create such a unique flavor characteristic in the beer. And it's just no two IPAs taste the same. So I love always tasting them and understanding how the brewer, translates the profile of the hops into the beer. So mine's IPA.
So that's a really good segue to the next question, because I feel like IPAs really kind of had their heyday in the last year or so. They're like, that was like the beer, hazy New England and all this crazy stuff. So what style do you predict will be the next variation that people are going to get, I don't know,
Hot tip coming. Hot tip.
line up for?
Your guess is as good as mine.
If you have the answer, let us know.
Crystal ball.
Yeah, I really don't know. I definitely wouldn't have predicted New England IPA. I mean, that wasn't really a thing until those New England breweries started doing these really juicy.
Is it even still a
hoppy,
thing
less
yet from a
bitter.
beer style standpoint? Or,
It
like,
is.
did they create it?
It is, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, they actually have a category in most competitions now. But I really have no idea what that next. Sorry, that's a terrible answer. But,
Lob something
Yeah,
out there.
Edit it out.
I think things are certainly trending, or they were for a minute there, towards lighter beers. So lagers kind of jumped back in the picture, and those became really popular. So now people are playing around with different types of lagers. Seltzers are obviously super popular right now.
The whole better for you category is, I don't think it's the next thing. I think it's already started, but people are steering towards things with lower calories, lighter alcohol, all that. But,
Is that why you guys did this?
That's part of the reason. Well, so what Robey's pointing to there is Sun Crush, our little spin-off brand. But the impetus behind that was just creating the best outdoor drinking beer we possibly could. I think it started with Eric and I both being away for the weekend. I think one of us was in the mountains, one of us at the beach. Either way, we both came back from like weekends just being spent outdoors, and kind of we were both happened to be thinking that
You weren't chugging a
there
gingerbread
wasn't-
stout?
We were not chugging a gingerbread stout.
Great return.
We were drinking some beer that just wasn't ideal for either sitting on the beach or going for a hike, and we started thinking, what would that ideal beer be? And so we said, well, maybe something with a little fruit, something a little lighter in alcohol, so you're not drunk after you have a few of them in the afternoon. We thought, we generally get a little lethargic when drinking beer, so, if you're having one on the beach at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, you might maybe a little green tea to give you a little pick-me-up. And it wasn't revolved around being a better for you beer, but I think they kind of steered in that direction, and we made it sort of lower in calories, and with the green tea gives some health benefits and antioxidants and all that. And then we add an enzyme that doesn't affect the flavor, but reduces the gluten to levels that would technically be considered gluten-free under, I think, 20 parts per milliliter. Something like that. I can't remember.
Gluten reduced.
Gluten reduced.
Yeah, we can't claim gluten-free, as you have to go through several certifications for that. But gluten reduced, gluten removed, crafted to remove gluten are all the phrases that we can use.
You've never had to say those before.
No, never.
So yeah, better for you is definitely a category that's starting to gain some steam.
You guys did such a good job predicting the next beer that's going to happen. Let's talk about the future of craft breweries in Richmond. I feel like every time either a new one opens, it's like, how many more breweries can Richmond sustain? And every time one closes, it's like the bubble has burst. So let's look into our crystal balls. COVID, I know we have to deal with COVID, so that could change everything clearly. But what do you guys see for the next 5 years in terms of the brewery scene?
My answer right now is people are still really craving innovation, and they really crave something new, and so they're always looking for the new best thing. So I think you'll continue to see breweries open. There is only so much room for so many breweries, but we keep thinking there's going to be a bubble burst, but I don't know that we've seen it. And at this point in time, there's still so many brewers around our city that are making such great beer. I mean, even the newcomers, they're all doing a really great job. We're lucky that we have so many great resources for especially new breweries now that didn't exist, 7-10 years ago. And so it makes it a lot more achievable to be able to open a brewery and make great beer. So that's a terrible answer as well, but I don't know. Innovation is still a thing, so people are just looking for something new.
I agree. I think there's definitely, I don't know if there's room or not room for more breweries, but I think there definitely will be more to open. I think there's still people with, the dream of opening a brewery. They'll see that dream through, and some will be successful and some won't. I think the bigger limitation is wholesale. There's only so much room on a draft lineup at a restaurant or the shelf at a grocery store or a store.
Any store?
Any store with shelves that sell beer.
So this last question, I can't even ask you because I don't want to know what your favorite mass market domestic beer is, because this is not a mass market. But I'm going to go to you guys to see if you have any questions for both Kate and Patrick. They're an open book today, so nothing's off limits.
Every day. Question.
How are your international distribution? I just came back from the restaurant. How's your international distribution from a business standpoint compared to your taproom sales from your national distribution?
Can you guys just repeat the question
So the way this is going to go, because we're on a podcast and people are listening, every time you guys ask a question, we're going to repeat it. So I apologize. So Scott, go ahead.
Oh, thanks.
You're welcome.
Do you want me to repeat the question?
No, please go ahead.
Well, the question was, how are international sales going compared to local domestic sales? Is that right? Yeah. I think there was a time 10 years ago when maybe even more, 15 years ago, when a brewery starting out could have dreams of becoming a nationally sold brand, and beyond that, an internationally sold brand. I think now there are so many breweries in the country that it's much harder to do that. I think there's so many breweries locally that people have options to drink a local beer, and they go to a new city and why not try what's local? So international is even going beyond that. Is international sales a route to further your business? In this market, maybe, probably not though. Is it another source of revenue? Sure. Is it kind of a fun way to expand your presence a little bit. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's a very small part of our sales, I guess, the short answer to your question, and that really kind of started with, I guess, Virginia has been really good about trying to expand exports, and so we've been participating in various programs that they have. I think that was what really got us started into sending into other countries.
So I think it's been about 4 or 5 years since we started exporting. When we first started, we jumped in hard. I mean, we went to a lot of different places, and we were quickly able to weed out what was going to work and what wasn't going to work. And we kind of took a little break for a minute. But right now, we have a very successful export program in Korea, Japan, and France. We actually just started back exporting to, and a lot of it really relies on an extremely successful relationship between the distributor there and the brewery, and we've been able to really develop a great relationship with those 3 places, as well as the support from the state. So that is where we're focused right now. Pat was saying that, as far as it being a big part of our sales, it's not, but the coolest thing is seeing something on Facebook about somebody in some bar in, Korea, and they take a picture of our tap handle, and they're like, look what I found, I'm from Richmond, and I'm traveling for work, and they take a picture of it. It's really neat to be able to see that. And it's also interesting, the markets are different internationally, and what's popular here isn't necessarily what's popular there, and it's neat to see what is in demand in those locations as opposed to what's in demand here.
Any other questions? Yes.
Are there any particular local products that you would like to see more producers growing for you?
Wow, yeah, I mean, God, we're willing to try anything that sounds good in a beer. But in particular, I mean, the hop industry, I think, there's been some hop growers that have started some farms. I think it's hard. That's a hard business, I think, unless you're doing it on a large scale. There's a lot of equipment involved, so it's a big investment. So, I'm not really holding my breath for that, though, we'd welcome, and support any, hop farm that want to start. But, I can't think of anything in particular, but again, we've used apples and peaches and raspberries and blackberries and ginger and honey, so, bring it on if you have something that you think would be good in a beer.
Yeah, I mean, when we get into large scale production, although we do continue to use local ingredients because that is something we are committed to, it certainly gets a little bit more challenging. We need to make sure that the product is aseptic and sanitary and isn't going to introduce any type of wild yeast or wild bacteria into our beer that could create any off flavors. So those types of things, we're really looking at just doing some of these unique things that maybe kind of need something different than we typically use in these small one-off batches, because we can process those ourselves. We can, sterilize them with heat on our own. But one thing that it kind of goes back to a question you guys asked, turmeric, right? So one of our local farmers had us taste turmeric, and I can't get away from thinking, like, is that, or turmeric.
Potato.
Turmeric. But to me, it's such a unique ingredient. Nobody uses it in their beers. It's, I don't know if you could make something out of it, but that would be something neat.
I agree completely.
Yeah.
I would love to do something with that beer, maybe
Turmeric.
saison or something.
Turmeric.
Anything else out there? I had one final question. Selfishly, I'm curious about the restaurant that you guys announced. I guess it was last year, probably. The idea that you were
And
going
I
to.
want to know about the cider. So let's ask
Can I
about
get
the
my question
restaurant. No,
in
you
first?
cannot. Absolutely not.
Please.
Yeah.
The restaurant that you guys announced with Joe. Where are we with that, and how is
The
COVID?
restaurant.
How is COVID?
Well, yeah. So we had. So the question is. No, I'm just kidding. I know I don't have to repeat that question. So.
It's a funny one.
Yeah, we had. we had like a big restaurant crush on Joe Sperato at Heritage, and so we started talking, and we're like, God, if we were to team up with someone, we would love to team up with you. And he was like, I was thinking the same thing, and so it's kind of a match made in heaven. And we started talking about this restaurant concept, and really developed it quite a bit to the point where we were about to break ground on this restaurant when COVID hit. And at that point, when we had to, it started with Capital One, working from home, and then all of a sudden our business was cut pretty drastically right there. And then we had to close our tap room one day, and we just said, we have to put the restaurant on hold. There was a big capital investment, and one, we didn't know, we need to be obviously conservative with our cash, and two, we didn't know if we'd be able to have people here to buy food. So we put that on hold.
So it's not dead, just on hold.
It is not dead. It's on hold. But we are building out. So we're renovating Richmond. So we, as I mentioned, we leased a building in the city of Richmond, and we bought the building next door. We ended up selling the building we bought about a year ago to less than a year ago to a development company that is building residential development.
Apartments, I think that's what they call it.
Yeah, apartments and townhomes.
Condos.
Condos. Well,
Residential
I think it was
things.
initially supposed to be like a mixed
Where
use
people live.
development. Yeah, people live and they sleep in these rooms. So they ended up buying our building, and as part of that, we're leasing it back. We have lease extensions going out 17 years, and there was a tenant improvement package that was involved with that, and part of that will be, it'll be bringing the brewing equipment over to the one building. They're going to tear down our original building, bring the brewing equipment to the other building, completely renovate it, and we're renovating the tap room, but also the patio space. And we're building out a pizza kitchen, which Joe Sperato is gonna head up and be our concept chef there.
It's like your dreams are coming true, Scott.
The framing is up for
It's
that
about
one. I
time.
saw it today. I'm
So-
very excited about
So
it.
yeah, we're opening
Yes,
at the
Sperato.
latest by the beginning of the new year. We'll have that up and running.
Ah, very cool.
End of
But
the year,
it's-
you said?
It's moving along really quick.
Nice.
So
Breaking news.
Love it.
hopefully, we don't know exactly when that'll open, but hopefully soon.
I heard that you have a question about ciders.
I think we're gonna wrap this up. I'm not
You
about
got your
ciders.
question?
No, you got your question.
Yes,
That's how
we
it
do
goes.
make cider.
There we go. Answer the question.
Part two.
Part two. You're listening to Eat It, Virginia with Robey and Scott. We had Kate Lee and Patrick Murtaugh of Hardywood live at Real Local. Thank you. Join our fun project.